everybody, my name is Angel and welcome back to my little corner of the internet. If you're new here, welcome and I hope you stick around. As you saw in the title of today's video, we're going to be talking about an anime called Paradise Kiss. Now this is actually an anime that I literally watched today as I'm filming this. This isn't going to come out for months, but I watched this anime today on the date of filming, and once again, much like Love Alarm, I have my computer next to me with a set of notes because I've run out of backlog things that I watched over the years. I think I now have to watch stuff to make videos on them. So we're gonna keep having this computer next to me with notes from now on, I think. Anyway, as per usual, we're gonna start this video by introducing our characters. Now the main character is a girl named Yukari. I don't remember her last name. There's only one student who ever addresses her by her last name. There's only one character who only addresses her by her last name, so I don't ever remember it. Also, one of the other characters gives her the nickname Caroline in episode 1 and continues calling her Caroline throughout the show. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to mostly call her Caroline because this character who gave her the nickname says her name the most out of everyone in the entire series. Other characters who use her first name, but Caroline is the one that I hear the most, so that's what I'm going to call her for the video. Sorry if that's confusing. The main love interest for this anime is named George. George is bi. That's like chef's kiss. Yeah, George is bi. He's also an aspiring fashion designer. He goes to a fashion design school. We have 3 supplementary characters that matter to me, and then there's one more that exists. And in my notes, I forgot to include his name until halfway through. So anyway, we have Isabella, Arashi, and Miwako, who all are friends of George and they work with him. They're all fashion design students in the same school. Isabella is actually a trans woman, so shout out to her. Love her. Arashi, I will switch between calling him Arashi and Angry Blonde because I called him that for half of my notes, and that was all I could get from him after the first episode, that he was angry, he was blonde, he has a lot of tattoos and piercings. No, he has a lot of piercings. I don't actually know if he has any tattoos, but he has several piercings. There's a safety pin in his lip. It is really distracting. Miwako is the most adorable little bean ever. I love her. She's so cute and small, and she has bubblegum pink hair for most of the show, so I did call her Bubblegum in my notes. I know her name now, so I'll probably call her Miwako, but she's so cute. I love her. She's really soft and gentle and excitable. Top tier human being. I don't know why I have so much to say about her. She doesn't really have much of a personality. She's just small and cute, and I would die for her. Oh yeah, the last secondary character who, honestly, I didn't know his name for most of the show. It's Hiro. I don't mention his name until halfway through my notes because I didn't know what it was. I just referred to him as the main character's crush for the beginning, and then I realized I should probably name him when things got convoluted as to his relation to the characters. Now that we've got our characters out of the way, let's move on to the plot. So the first episode, Caroline is on her way to school. I'm pretty sure she's going to actual school because she does regular classes and then she also has something called cram school to prep for entrance exams to college. But she's on her way to one of her academic curricular activities, and she's crossing the street and some guy is behind her yelling, "Hey you, girl with the long hair," which isn't descriptive, and then he's in the high school uniform or whatever, and she turns around and she yells at him that she ain't got time for this, she has places to be or whatever, and he turns her around or whatever, and then he starts talking and he's like, "How tall are you? You look about 5'6", yada yada yada." He starts mumbling all of this stuff about a costume or something like that. She finally looks at him, freaks out because he has 6 piercings in his face, including the paperclip in his mouth. I'm telling you, it is so distracting to me every time he talks because I'm just looking at the paperclip moving. Not paperclip, safety pin. I'm just looking at the safety pin jiggling in his lip, and I'm like, how do you operate with that? Like, just in general. But, like, especially if you're, like, kissing somebody. Isn't it weird? Because, like, it's a regular size safety pin. It's not even, like a small one that, like, just here. Nah, it's, like, it goes out to, like, here. Halfway down a sheet. How you operate with it? Anyway. She notices all of his piercings and she freaks out. I don't really know why she's so terrified of him, but she starts running away and he doesn't notice it at first, but then he does, and so he starts chasing her. She's not paying attention to where she's going and she bumps into a very tall woman. That's what I called her at first. Turns out this is Isabella, and Adachi is the man with many piercings that she ran away from, yells to Isabella not to let her get away no matter what, which freaks her out, and she makes some dramatic conclusion that Isabella is the Grim Reaper. At least that's what she calls her. I don't know if that was supposed to be literal or if this is some sort of metaphor that I don't get, but she says she must be the Grim Reaper and then passes out in her arms, and I'm like, well, that's not okay. She wakes up a while later and Miwako is like standing over her like, oh, thank goodness you're awake. And then Adachi and Isabella are standing off to the side. But when Adachi opens his mouth to say, oh, thank goodness you're awake, she freaks out again and Miwako has to like hold her down to get her to chill out. She calms down eventually and they finally explain, we're design students, we need a model because our school hosts this annual fashion show competition thing where all of the students are supposed to design something and make it for the fashion show and have somebody model it. I don't really know why they can't model their own designs, but I guess the designer is usually not the model. Anyway, the way this competition works, all of the students submitted a design and certain designs got selected. If your design didn't get selected, you were supposed to join a team with a design that did get selected. So here is our team. We have Adachi, Isabella, Miwako, and George, who we don't meet right away, but he's part of the clique. She meets the three of them first, minus George. She meets the other three first. They explain to her that they need a model for their school's fashion competition, and she's like, is that it? Why didn't you just say so or whatever? They assume that that means she's going to agree, and then she says she doesn't have time because she's too busy studying for exams. And she gets up to leave and Adachi loses his mind and starts yelling at her. Homeboy's really aggressive, but only sometimes, so I feel like people aren't meant to pay attention to it, but I'll get more into that later. Adachi starts losing his mind and like yells at her and starts going off on this rant about how she's not important just because she's studying for exams and they're not, she's like mocking them or whatever else in the third, and that's not at all what she meant, which he obviously wouldn't know. That they don't know each other, so I don't know why he's jumping to conclusions. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. Adachi yells at her and she gets mad, and so she leaves. Logically, I wouldn't stay in a place where someone's screaming at me anyway. She leaves. She drops her student ID book on the ground on her way out, and then we learn that she has a crush on someone she goes to school with. This is Hiro. He's not important until later on in the show. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't think he was gonna be relevant at all because I knew that she didn't end up with him. So I was like, I don't know why you're establishing this with me. I don't really care. George, who turns out to be the ringleader of our little fashion crew, has a conversation with them later. They mention what happened and the fact that they had found somebody they wanted to do it, and he makes the assumption that Adachi got mad, yelled at her, and scared her away. And so George goes to her school either that same, I think it's the next day, or maybe the same day. I'm honestly a little conflicted on the timeline for most of the show. But George goes to her school and first apologizes on behalf of his friends for practically kidnapping her and causing her a little bit of stress. She accepts the apology. She's just trying to get on with her life, and he mentions that he in fact knows where her school ID book is, and she's like, okay, well, can you give it back to me? And he tells her to get in the car because apparently he doesn't have it with him, and they get in his little vintage vehicle. It's a real old school looking car. I don't know what kind of car it is because if they show the logo, I didn't take note of it. So they get in his car, they start driving, and she's like, well, the studio isn't this way. And he's like, I'm not taking you there. And she's like, well, where are we going? And he says, to paradise? Yo, when I tell you this line sent me, I was screaming in laughter and then she was screaming in fear. Which is valid, because a man you don't know tells you to come with him to get your ID book. You think you're going one place and then you end up going to Paradise. They end up going somewhere else, obviously, to Paradise. It's a school building, if I understand correctly, like a room in his design school. And they run into one of his friends. I don't remember his name, but I really like him. He's a hair and makeup artist. He's really cool, really vibing. I really dig him. I'm almost certain that he and George have a history. It wouldn't surprise me, but they don't talk about it. There's only one time where it's subtly almost mentioned. Somebody tells him that he's never gonna have a lasting relationship the way he lives his life because he has a girlfriend and a boyfriend. And I was like, huh? Wait a minute. Whom? Because the boyfriend isn't mentioned unless it's the hair and makeup artist. Or Isabella, but why would they misgender her? If it's Isabella, then that's disrespectful because that's misgendering. If it's the hair and makeup artist, wouldn't surprise me. But anyway, it's not relevant. They go to this hair and makeup artist, and George asks him to give Caroline a haircut, which she's a little bit hesitant about, and then they do it anyway. They basically just cut her bangs super short. After the haircut, he drags her back to the studio, which is the place she woke up in before. It is an old bar that George's uncle used to own. They shut it down, and the four of them remodeled it to turn it into a studio for them to design clothes. It's underground as well. So if I mention a staircase, because I will later, but if I mention a staircase, it's the staircase to the entrance of the studio. Anyway, after a conversation with the ragtag team of misfit designers, I don't know, man, George takes her to the studio. They get her dressed up in a design of theirs. The four of them have a brand called Paradise Kiss, also the name of the anime. Parakiss for short. But they get her dressed up in one of their little Parakiss designs or whatever, and she has a conversation with Miwako about the four of them and their like plans and their design tactics and all that stuff. And then George asks her to seriously consider being the model for their little show. Then she finds out that George had her ID book the whole time and tricked her into doing all sorts of other stuff. It doesn't matter. I think he gives it back at this point. I can't recall. He gives her 3 days to make a decision on whether or not she'll be their model. Anyway, the next day, George shows up at the library where she's studying because that's like all she does. And initially sits in front of her. And he's like, oh, are you studying? My bad, I'll get out of the way. Don't mind me. But she can't focus, so he moves and sits somewhere else. And she gets back to studying. And then after she leaves the library, she runs into him outside of it. And the two of them sit and eat her lunch together, and she complains, and we find out that she has a super overbearing mother who's like always on her case about how much she needs to study and how important it is that she gets good grades and gets into a top university, and you know the drill. Yeah, we find out that she's really not vibing with the path. She's doing it because her mom is telling her to. She doesn't even think she wants to go to college. And then she also tells him that she's very much considering doing the modeling for their competition. Come to find out, her little brother snitched and told George where to find her, thinking that that was her boyfriend or something. I don't really know what he assumed, but here's the reason that he knew where to find her. He called her house phone because he got her contact information from the ID book. The next day, she goes to the studio to ask some questions before she actually agrees to do the modeling thing because she realizes she has no idea what she actually is supposed to do. And she walks into the studio, and Angry Blonde is about to do the do with Miwako on the pool table. Angry Blonde is Arashi, just to clarify. Anyway, she freaks out, and Isabella shows up and scolds Arashi and Miwako for using the pool table as a bed and the studio as a love hotel. Anyway, they're out of tea because Isabella was gonna make them tea. And so Caroline offers to go and get some tea, and Miwako goes with her. We learn that Miwako and Arashi have been friends since they were kids. There was a third member of their trio, that was Hiro, but there was a falling out that happened between them 2-3 years ago. According to Miwako, they drifted apart, and it sends Caroline into crisis about how easily friendships can fall apart if you go to different schools, and I'm like, girl, chill. relax. You can still be friends with people you don't go to school with, because guess what? You can still keep in touch with people you don't go to school with. It's not that deep. She went into a whole crisis, and maybe I don't get it because one of my best friends goes to school in Atlanta. Another one of my close friends literally just transferred to school in Hawaii, so I won't see him for a while. He's also 6 hours behind me time zone wise. Another one of my friends, like all of my closest friends don't go to school with me, and I'm still pretty close to them because we know how to keep in touch with each other. Do you know how crazy that is? Your friendships are not dependent on you being in the same vicinity as people. In case you were wondering, I guess that's advice. Anyway, after her little crisis, she agrees to model for them, and George asks her if she's really willing to commit to the responsibilities of like doing it, because he says that she has to work with their schedule and not the other way around, and she gets really mad and starts yelling for... I'm honestly not sure why she gets mad and starts yelling, but she starts yelling and I started laughing, and then eventually George starts laughing, and it makes her even more angry because now she feels like he's laughing at her. And he says that he's laughing because he's happy that she agreed or something like that. And then they get her all dressed up in another Parakiss outfit and they celebrate her agreeing to be one of their models, and then she drinks champagne and passes out because I guess no main character in Eastern media is allowed to have an alcoholic tolerance. How often is it that the main character of a K-drama or an anime, I don't actually watch that many animes where the characters are drinking, but in K-dramas, they love to do that, where the main character has like 2 shots of soju and then passes out or throws up everywhere. Why can't y'all let these girls have an alcohol tolerance? What's the deal? Anyway, after like a day or two, I believe, George asks for her phone number and tells her to focus on her studies because when he needs her to come by the studio, he'll call her. Otherwise, she doesn't really need to be there. And she gets really anxious, like to the point where she's like checking her phone incessantly, and she's trying to wonder if she's allowed to go to the studio if he doesn't call her, or I don't know. And then she realizes she doesn't really care what he thinks because her actual crush, Hiro, is at school. At this point, I'm pretty sure she has a crush on him and doesn't know, because there's a point where she makes a comment that his cologne is more intoxicating than champagne. I don't think champagne has a high enough alcohol content for her to be passing out after half a flute anyway, but that's not the point. Next day, she invites Hiro out to tea with her, and she invites Miwako to tea as well because she wanted to try and mend their friendship, but she had no idea why they had a falling out to begin with, and I wrote it in my notes because like she doesn't know why their friendship ended, and I feel like making them go to tea together was a really bad idea. And then we learned that it was a bad idea because 2-ish, maybe 3 years ago, Arashi and Hiro had a fight over Miwako. Miwako had feelings for them both. She started dating Arashi though, and then Arashi told her that if she ever spoke to Hiro again, he'd break up with her. So she told Hiro never to talk to her again and that she didn't want to see him and she shouldn't come looking for her. And that's how their friendship ended. Honestly, this is my first red flag for Arashi. Besides the fact that he like yelled at the main character for no reason in the beginning. I'ma let that one slide, but like, controlling much? Like, I don't know how you justify that. And I get it. She had feelings for both of them, so I guess I can almost see why it would upset him, but it's not your place to dictate your girlfriend's friendships, especially because you were both really close to this person. Like, why would you put her in that situation where she has to choose between the two of you? Like, I would have chose neither of them. Actually, I would have chose the one that didn't make me choose, so I would have gone with Hiro personally because he didn't put me in a situation. But doesn't matter. She chose Arashi. That's why she and Hiro aren't friends anymore, and I guess ultimately why he and Arashi aren't friends anymore. As it turns out, George has already decided that he has feelings for Caroline, and so he starts ignoring her because he catches her walking down the street with Hiro, and he gets all jealous and angry or whatever, and I'm like, I mean, I guess, sweaty. Anyway, Miwako still has feelings for both Arashi and Hiro. She says she loves them both, which is fine. Go polyamory, I guess. Anyway, fast forward a couple days later, Caroline and George are meant to go on a date that's not a date, about which he says, "We'll get so close that you won't be able to stand it." And I wrote that line down because I really didn't know how to feel about it. I was like, I don't know if that's supposed to make me uncomfortable, or like, is this flirting? What are you doing? What is happening here, George? Side note, I don't really like George's haircut. It looks really choppy, except it looks nice when he slicks it back, but he only does that in like one episode. The rest of it, it's just like kind of choppy and in his face, and I don't like the way it looks, but that's a personal preference. It's a nice color, and when he wears hats he looks hot, which he does a lot, so it's fine. But anyway, George doesn't call her about the date not date, and so she gets mad and calls him when she gets out of class, and he's like, "Hey, are you done with classes?" And she's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, so come over here." And she gets there, and then she yells at him because he didn't contact her about the whole situation, and she starts nagging him because she is upset that he didn't call to actually make plans for them to hang out, even though he was the one who said, "We'll hang out on Saturday." So I guess valid. She didn't have to chew him out the way she did, but valid. And then they get into like a mini argument because he starts making some stupid statements, and then they end up making out in the stairwell in front of the studio. Love to see it. Anyway, some days pass, and after a day in the studio, George is supposed to be taking Caroline home. They get stuck in traffic, so they take a detour to go and get dinner, and then afterwards George makes some statements, and then they end up back at his place, and the two of them get into an argument, and George starts sounding really condescending. They get into an argument because Caroline has been lying to her mom about what she's doing, and so George decides that she does too much complaining and doesn't do anything to actually take control of her life, and that she blames everyone for everything else, which doesn't make sense because she just was saying that her mom is super controlling and always on her back. I don't know what that has to do with her blaming everyone else for all of the things that happen in her life. He's really condescending and not understanding, and maybe it's because I have a relatively controlling parent that I see where she's coming from, and his attitude about it is kind of disrespectful considering he has absentee parents. But I digress. They get into an argument, she leaves his place and calls Miwako crying, and Miwako comes to pick her up and makes some statements about how much she's mad at George, and honestly, I just love her so much. She's like, "I hate him, how can you do this to you? I'm gonna beat him up." She's so small though, and I love her. Anyway, Miwako takes her back to where she's staying. She's living with her sister and her sister's family. The two of them talk for a little bit, and Caroline tells Miwako that she plans to tell her mom the truth when she goes home eventually, because she's tired of lying to her mom and trying to figure everything out on her own. George shows up to apologize for being rude earlier, and then he takes her home. When Caroline tells her mom the truth about what she's been doing, her mom slaps her, and so Caroline runs away from home. She also decides to drop out of high school because she doesn't want to go to college anymore, and she doesn't really think there's a point in graduating from high school if she's not going to go to college. And she ends up staying with Arashi while she figures out her next career move as far as getting a job or whatever. This girl makes a lot of life-altering decisions all in one afternoon. Like, she moved out, decided she wasn't doing high school anymore and didn't want to go to college. And Arashi's the only one like, "Are you crazy?" The rest of them are like, "Wow, that's so cool, we support you." And Arashi's like, "You need a plan. Maybe at least graduate high school. That's not something that's completely out of pocket to decide to do." Anyway, Miwako helps her get a job interview at her sister's shop because Miwako's sister, Mikoko, is also a fashion designer. Caroline ends up being offered a modeling job for Miwako's sister's clothing line as opposed to the sales job that she went in for the interview for. Hiro calls her because she didn't show up for the first day of midterms, and she tells him that she's not planning on taking midterms, and I'm pretty sure this is our first clue that Hiro has a crush on her because he's way too pressed about this one random classmate who didn't show up to class. Especially because he didn't even have her number. I don't know how he got it, because earlier in the show, Caroline tells George that he doesn't have her phone number, so I don't know where he got it from, but I digress. Anyway, Caroline goes to the photo shoot, and it goes great. Afterwards, she has dinner with her little fashion crew buddies, and then George takes her home. They kiss in his vehicle, and then she brings him in for coffee. And then they get busy. Get silly. Anyway, meanwhile, Hiro went to Arashi's mom's house because Arashi is staying there while Caroline's in his apartment. And Hiro asks Arashi if he knows where Caroline is. He mentions that he had met up with Miwako earlier, and initially Arashi doesn't want to tell Hiro where Caroline is. I'm not sure why, but he's down for the cause. Like, he's ready to take that secret to his grave. But Hiro threatens to go to Miwako to find answers, and so Arashi caves and tells him. And so Hiro goes to Arashi's apartment where Caroline is busy getting busy. For some reason, Miwako went to the apartment. She's there before Hiro gets there. Puts her ear up to the door, notices what's happening, walks down the stairs trying to escape, notices Hiro, and tells him that she will deliver his message to Caroline because she is busy being kinky. The two of them go to a park, and Miwako explains to Hiro what's going on in Caroline's home life and why she's living in Arashi's apartment. After doing the do, Caroline the next morning moves in with George. Also, the fashion show is in like 2 weeks now, so it's been maybe 2 months? I don't actually know. I don't know when they got her as a model. The fashion show is at like the beginning of November, so we're in October right now. Arashi is now mad at Miwako because she didn't mention that she had met up with Hiro, and yeah, she never told him, and so he's mad at her, but he also won't tell her that that's why he's mad. Meanwhile, Caroline is trying to get a modeling career off the ground, and Mikoko, Miwako's sister, tells her about a friend of hers who's starting a modeling agency. It's relatively small at this point, and she offers her to meet with the lady in charge. She goes and meets with her, but because Caroline is still technically a minor, she needs a parent's signature on her contract for her to actually get started, and so she realizes, oh, I have to move home. But she's having trouble telling George that. Fast forward like a day, she meets up with Hiro at a coffee shop, and he gives her some unnecessary, unsolicited advice and starts passing judgment on her life choices that nobody asked him to do, and the two of them aren't even close. That's what pisses me off about this, because up until like 2 weeks ago, he didn't even have her phone number. They barely talk outside of class. She had this one-sided crush on him. I didn't even know if he knew her name. Like, they're not close enough for him to be passing judgment on her life situation. He knows that she moved out because her mom wasn't listening to her, and he's blaming it on George and thinks that her getting a boyfriend is the reason why she's like slacking off in school or whatever else in the third. And it pissed me off to watch this conversation go down. She also gets mad and tells him to bug off, and then immediately retracts and says, thank you for being worried, but like, you don't have to. I'm fine, and I made these decisions on my own, yada yada yada. Afterwards, Caroline goes back to George's place where she's staying. She runs into George's mom, and the two of them have a short conversation, which leads her to decide that she is going back to her house that night. She doesn't want to end up like George's mom, because George's mom is like, I had a kid at a young age, I couldn't keep modeling, yada yada yada, this, that, and the third. She's kind of a depressing figure to exist. And she's like, yeah, well, I can't end up like that. So she decides to go home. She tries to tell George about it, and the two of them get into an argument where he's once again condescending because she tried to tell him the night before, but he distracted her with the business. And so when she tells him the next day that she plans to leave, he's like, yeah, if you would put us doing the do above your career, then I don't know how he drew that conclusion, because she chose not to tell you that night. It means that y'all getting busy is more important to her than her becoming a model. I don't think that's how that works, but go off. Anyway, she moves back in with her mom, who finally listens to her, and they come to a compromise. Her mom says she can be a model if she at least graduates high school and takes the entrance exams. It's one thing if she doesn't get in, but at the very least she has to graduate for high school. That's her mom's condition on the whole situation. Anyway, at this point, we're in episode 9 of this show, and I'm getting real sick and tired of George's behavior, honestly. this show is only 12 episodes long, and George is like a pain for 8.5 of them. Honestly, I'm tired of Hiro too. I'm so sick of his unsolicited advice and trying to pass judgment on her life like he's her guardian. If he gives her advice that she didn't ask for one more time, I will sock him. That's what I wrote. I was so mad. I was ready to rock him. I'm like, I really get annoyed with unsolicited advice. If I don't ask, please don't give it to me. I'm sure. I have it figured out. Thank you. Anyway, Caroline is busy overexerting herself to make up the exams that she missed. And she doesn't eat, she doesn't sleep. She finishes all of her exams and passes them pretty well, but then she's on her way to a rehearsal for the fashion show, and George actually showed up to pick her up, I guess, even though the two of them haven't spoken since they got into an argument the week before over her leaving to go home and him being condescending. George is dumb. He's a pompous crackhead. Anyway, I don't even know if he counts as a tsundere, to be honest. Kind of just arrogant. Anyway, George showed up to pick her up for the rehearsal, I guess, and she passes out like right by his car. And so he takes her to the hospital, and all of a sudden he's emotionally available and really, really kind to her. And I'm like, where did all of this energy suddenly come from? How did we get here? What happened to the pompous ass who acts like he's better than her at every turn? I ain't really mad at it, I guess. I guess I should be fine. I should be happy that he's like now treating her like she's more than just a plaything. Moving on, the fashion show. We're gonna move on to that. I don't think there's anything else. So now we're at the fashion show. Hiro shows up because Caroline is modeling in it, and he goes with the landlord who owns the penthouse where he stays. He lives by himself. Oh no, he doesn't live by himself. But he goes with the landlord that owns the apartment building that he used to live in, or something like that. Some old man who was in charge of his housing when he was younger. In fact, in the show, there's this scene where he introduces himself. He's like, for those who don't know me, I'm the landlord who owned the apartment complex that Miwako, Arashi, and Hiro lived in when they were younger. If you want to know more about me, make sure to pick up your copy of Meet the Neighbors to learn more about me. They're like promoting the manga in this show, and I think that's so funny. Anyway, the two of them are there together, and the landlord is like, you're in the middle of studying for entrance exams. Why would you come to a student's fashion show? And he says, I have a crush on a girl that's modeling in it. And you know what's funny? She has a boyfriend. And I'm kind of mad because she had a crush on you first, you moron. If you'd made a move on her sooner, you could have had her. What is wrong with you? Why would you wait until... You had a crush on her this whole time. Why didn't you make a move? I honestly don't know if I would have been happy with her ending up with Hiro, but he could have had her. It didn't have to turn out this way, you know? He could have had a shot. She didn't even like George at first. Anyway, George's parents also show up to the fashion show, and this is the first time we see them interact, and their relationship is low-key kind of toxic because George's father, much like himself, treats his... I don't even know if they're married. He treats her like a plaything. I don't think they're married, though. I think they're just dating. And they never establish whether or not they're married, but George makes a lot of comments about his dad's promiscuity, so I have to assume that they're not married, especially because Miss Mom says that she hasn't heard from him in 2 months, and then they showed up at the fashion show separately, and then she walked over to scold him for not talking to her for 2 months, and then he said he was going to come over after the show, and I was like, okay. Anyway, now we know where George gets his lack of commitment from, but I digress. The fashion show happens, Caroline does great. They get second place as opposed to first place, and Caroline's pretty peeved about it, but she gets over it. Everyone else is celebratory, so she can only be mad for so long. Fast forward, now it's Christmas! Caroline's modeling career is just sort of taking off. George is also modeling with her some of the time. Apparently, he decided he didn't want to be a fashion designer anymore. He wanted to instead go into hair and makeup because he doesn't really like the industry of fashion designing because he likes to design stuff for himself as opposed to stuff that other people will wear realistically. So he can't get behind the business aspect of the whole fashion designing thing because all of his designs are like dramatic and over the top and really fancy, and regular everyday people aren't going to want to buy that kind of thing, so it seems like a waste of his time to go into fashion designing consistently. But he and Caroline get into an argument because an old friend of George's shows up in the middle of the night at their house, and Caroline, honestly, validly so, has a bit of an attitude with her. And before she knows that it's George's old friend, she's just kind of confused by the situation. She gets mad, and then George gets mad at her after the friend leaves for not being respectful. But I don't really get it, because this woman showed up unannounced in the middle of the night ringing the doorbell. I think as a girlfriend, I'd be a little peeved too, because I didn't know who you were. Like, what are you doing here? Who are you? Like, I get it. I would have been mad. I honestly would have gotten mad if any stranger showed up in my house in the middle of the night. But how am I supposed to make the connection that this is a childhood friend of yours? Like, you didn't give me a name when she opened the door. Miwako and Arashi are also arguing at this point in the show. They get into a fight because Miwako is texting Hiro and Arashi smashes her phone. And if the fact that he didn't want them to be friends earlier was not a red flag, the fact that he smashed her phone over her texting him would have been a serious red flag. Would have broke up with him then. And then he says something about Hiro being perfect and he never would have forced himself on her. And I'm like, wait, so you forced her to be in a relationship with you? Like, I'm just getting more and more red flags, man. Like, I don't understand. Why are y'all still together? But anyway, the two of them make up. Miwako cuts her hair and dyes it black, and it makes me kind of sad. It's cute, but like, the bubblegum pink. Anyway, now it's New Year's Eve. Arashi makes plans with Hiro and Miwako, and the three of them go and kiki together like they are children again. I don't know if this means that there's some sort of intended polyamory happening there or what, but moving on. Everyone graduates. George decides to move to Paris to do fashion. Caroline stays in Tokyo for her modeling career. Isabella moves to Paris with George to design the patterns for the fabrics that he'll be using to design his stuff. Miwako starts working with her sister's company, and Arashi is hoping his music career will take off, but I don't actually know what his graduation plans are, because he said he knows that that's like unlikely, so I think he had another plan, but I don't remember it. I don't know how I missed it. I just watched the show. But George also gives her an entire closet of Parakiss stuff that he designed. And I thought the show was going to end with Caroline crying in this closet of clothing that she has. But then there's another scene where Caroline tells the audience via voiceover that she's about to get married, and for her honeymoon, her husband and her will be going to America to watch a play that they want to see, I'm assuming on Broadway, that George designed the costumes for. And she said the musical or the play is supposed to be a comedy, but she's sure she'll cry when she sees it. I'm kind of upset that she and George didn't end up together in the end. I mean, realistically, they could have. I don't really see why they couldn't. If she's a model and he's a fashion designer, y'all couldn't just like, whatever. It's fine. It's fine. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They didn't end up together in the end. I feel like they could have. But I guess I'm not surprised. There's several people who allude to the fact that George wouldn't be able to keep her happy in the long term. But like, they were making such progress at the end. Things were so good between them. So the show ends with Caroline getting married to someone that we never meet anyway. She just tells us that she's getting married. We don't get to meet the boyfriend or the fiance or the husband, whatever you want to call him. That's how the anime ends. This has been Paradise Kiss in a nutshell. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Wait, before you go, at the end of all of my videos, I ask a question for you to drop an answer to down below in the comment section. This week's question is, what's your favorite soda? I personally don't really drink dark soda like that, so Coke, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, Mr. Pibb. I'm not a big fan of any of those drinks. I'll drink them every once in a while, namely Coke, but not often. And most of the times I drink Coke mixed with Sprite. I think my favorite soda is probably Sprite, with Fanta as a close second. So, what is everyone's favorite soda? If you like this video, go ahead and like, comment, share, and subscribe. Hit the little bell so you never miss one of my videos. I hope to see you all again. Bye!